Square is one of the best fintech companies of this generation, and they just announced their earnings. I'm going to be talking about what I like about their latest earnings report, what I dislike, and most importantly, if I'm going to be buying more shares. Square actually beat analyst estimates for their latest Q4 2020 earnings, coming in at 0.32 earnings per share versus the 24 cents that analysts expected. Yes, we're talking about positive numbers, guys. How many of these razzle-dazzle fintech companies actually have a path toward profitability? Square's already making money at the end of the day. If you're unfamiliar with how Square's business model works, make sure you check out the video that I've already done on them, where I go into much more detail and why I think they're such a great business. Now in Q4, Square had a gross profit of $804 million. That's 52% higher year over year than they were in Q4 of 2019. Now quarter over quarter there isn't much growth, but I'm still very impressed in the past year how much Square has grown, especially on their bottom line. Now this is primarily attributed to their amazing peer-to-peer mobile payment app that allows users to transfer money with the flick of a wrist. But what am I saying? Of course you already know what Cash App is. Cash App now has 36 million monthly active users. That's 50% higher than they were last year. Cash App makes Square money in several different ways, including instant deposit and cash card fees. If you have basically an entire state of California using your app at least once a month, that gives you plenty of exciting options and just continues to prove that people are using Square's ecosystem. Remember, if you get somebody hooked on one of Square's products, chances are they might dive into some of the other Square services. That customer acquisition cost becomes that much cheaper. Think about how easily Cash App is spread via word of mouth. If you need somebody to pay you back, that other user also has to have Cash App. Otherwise, there's a good chance that you might not be getting paid. Square now says it only costs $5 to acquire a new customer. That's a super low cost. Considering that Square now makes a gross profit of $41 per transacting active customer. That's up 70% year over year. Cash App return on investment is also very high, meaning that the longer the customer stays on the Cash App platform, the money just keeps flowing in and in. And Cash App's retention rate is quite high, as well as their gross profit retention rate, which has been greater than 130% year over year for the past 3 years. They also have a cash card that users can utilize to have personal rewards programs and even earn Bitcoin on purchases. And there's extra incentives if they link up their direct deposit via Cash App. Again, the reoccurring theme here is keep looking for all the different legs of this ecosystem that Square is slowly building. Now, I think what you are all so excited about is about Bitcoin. Cash App allows users to be able to buy, sell, and transfer Bitcoin safely. How many of you thought I was gonna say collect cash? Even I'm thinking about buying Bitcoin for the first time on Cash App. So if you're somebody who already uses Cash App to buy Bitcoin, let me know in the comments below, because I might have some questions. Also, if you're liking this content, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. In 2020, more than 3 million people bought and sold Bitcoin on Cash App. And in just January of 2021, over 1 million customers bought Bitcoin for the first time. Volumes were up almost 3x year over year. Square does boast an impressive $1.76 million of Bitcoin revenue on its top line, but its bottom line gross profit is just $41 million. Meaning their margins are close to a mediocre 2%. This is another reoccurring theme with Square, and this might be a pro or con depending on the person, but they seem to be very closely tied up with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, as we know, is still a very volatile asset class with daily unpredictable fluctuations. Square prior to this had previously announced that they had bought $50 million worth of Bitcoin to add to their balance. And the day that they announced earnings, they actually acquired another 3,318 Bitcoins for about $170 million. So by buying Square, you're definitely getting great exposure to Bitcoin. Again, this might be a pro or a con depending on how you feel about cryptocurrency. Square also completed their acquisition of Credit Karma Tax for $50 million in Q4. So add just one more thing to their already growing ecosystem. Okay, so let's look at their income statement year over year. So they actually had a net revenue of $9.4 billion in 2020 versus $4.7 billion in 2019. Now, understandably, there's a huge elephant in the room, and that's of course Bitcoin revenue making up $4.6 billion of revenue in 2020. Now, this is more of an accounting policy that Square basically has to disclose. They're not trying to sneak in and fool us with some Bitcoin revenue in their income statement, but rather just fulfilling accounting obligation. To me personally, I don't really think you can count Bitcoin returns because, we can't bank on these returns coming in forever. Like, there's no way you can tell me in 2021 how much Bitcoin revenue is. It's just so unpredictable, unlike other segments where you might have a bit more predictability and are comparing more apples to apples. But even ignoring Bitcoin revenues, we can see that other segments are still growing pretty impressively here in their transaction-based revenue, subscriptions, as well as hardware to a lesser extent. And of course, remember, all of this was done during a year where we had a pandemic that caused most businesses to not even be able to operate. And I haven't even mentioned this yet, but most of Square's core business model is the point of sales device that they use. This is what a lot of small businesses use to complete transactions, rather than the alternate, which is expensive machines that take larger cuts of potential profit. I also really like Square's solid balance sheet, which boasts $3.2 billion in cash and cash equivalents, which is more than enough to pay off their long-term debt of $2.6 billion if they for some reason chose to do so. Plus, Bitcoin only goes up, right? Let's take a closer look at their GPV, or gross payment volumes. Transaction-based revenue was $929 million in Q4, which is up 12% year over year. Now remember, many small businesses were not even allowed to operate for much of this year. Yet Square found a way to continue to grow its business. That is truly remarkable. Now if we look at gross payment volume, it's a nice upward trajectory. Same thing with gross profit. Nice upward trajectory. This to me shows that more people are using those Square chips to complete transactions. Now, what is this ecosystem I keep talking about with Square? Well, you already know that Square provides the point of sales transactions. They sell hardware to make small businesses' lives easier. It has payroll features. They do taxes like I mentioned earlier with Credit Karma. They're entering the banking industry too, and they're going to be able to do small business loans to help people who might have otherwise been overlooked by traditional banks. For individuals, you can buy Bitcoin, you can buy stocks. Now you can use it also as a checking and savings account. There's just so many opportunities here with Square. I feel like this was a great earnings report, and there's just so many different segments being resilient and showing off their impressive growth that people expected from Jack's other company. Square's stock price went down heavily, but I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. People priced in so much expectation into Square. It has a ridiculous PE ratio. Square could have found Jerome's infinite money printer and the stock still would have went down. In the long term, I think Square will be a much bigger company than it is today, and that's what really matters. I'm gonna continue to dollar cost average into Square, and remember, buying ARK-K gives you good exposure to Square, as Cathie Wood is also a big believer in their business model. One last big thing that I doubt you'll hear anyone else talk about on YouTube if you've stayed for this long is that Square is actually not part of the S&P 500 just yet. One of the requirements, as you remember, when Tesla got added to the S&P 500 was 4 straight quarters of profitability. Square is now at a whole 2 quarters, so they still have a way to go. But remember, the S&P 500 does not care about valuation when it gets added, and Square is already well above $100 billion in market cap. Tesla had somewhere near $50 billion boosted into their market cap because of the S&P 500 just had to passively buy it. Not that this should ever be a reason to buy the stock, but I expect that something similar will happen with Square one day, so I'm gonna be loading up the boat right now. As always, remember, this is not financial advice. I'm just sharing my opinion about Square for educational purposes only. I do think Square is one of those stocks I'm just gonna be buying and stashing and holding for the long term and collecting cash on the way. If you've liked this content, please hit that like button and subscribe with notifications so you don't miss my videos.